Hello and welcome back to Constructive Interference. I am your host, Joel Curtinitis, along with my co-host, Josh Hugo. Hope you had an amazing week. We've got a lot of great content for you tonight. We're going to be talking about the border crisis because, hey, everybody else is talking about it, so why not? But first, have you been out to follow us on social media yet? If not, you need to ask yourself why and sort of reevaluate your life, because really, this is the best thing that you're going to follow on social media, so you ought to take a few seconds to go do it. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TheCI and on Twitter at The CI Show, conveniently enough. We're also on Google Play and iTunes, so make sure you go out there and hit us up. Don't miss an episode, and we'll just launch right in tonight. So there is a border crisis. Of course, there's these catchy terms that you hear. They're thrown around all the time by the media because as soon as somebody comes up with something that sounds catchy, the rest of them latch onto it. So now we have a border crisis. What does the border crisis look like? Well, there is a photo that sort of encapsulates what I think most of the country's view is on it, and it is a Hispanic woman at the southern border of the United States pulling her two children away from a canister of tear gas, and that was the kind of climax of the border crisis today. Is that border agents began firing tear gas into a crowd of people trying to come across the border. And this has been long anticipated, right? So we've heard about this caravan that's coming up from South and Central America to the American border. Numbers, I think people are estimating of five to 8,000. I think is the numbers that we're talking about here. So it's a significant number of people who have made their way up and tried to come across. Now, a lot of people will remember at the end of Obama's second term, there was a similar caravan, but it was mostly children. And there was a giant immigration dust-up around that as well. But it has sparked the immigration debate again, and the general debate about asylum and refugees and you know what America's stance is when we now have a president who is who at least arguably came to power promising to close down the borders. And so there's a lot of narratives that are spinning around right now. Josh Hugo, tell us what some of those narratives are.
Well, it's kind of the same sort of overarching meta narrative that is used to describe everything in our society nowadays, it seems like. And that's to cast everything in this sort of us versus them, good versus evil, like epic struggle in which you have to belong to one side or the other, and one side or the other has to win. So the narrative that we are seeing here with this immigration crisis is you have to be either pro-immigrant or anti-immigrant. One or the other, pick a side, and you're not allowed to have any sort of nuance or any space in between those two.
And I bet you're going to tell us that's wrong, you squishy, moderate fence rider.
Yes. Yes, I am. Well, the thing is, it's one of those things, Joel, where it's so wrong. It's so deeply wrong on so many levels that you don't even know where to begin. For one thing, it's meaningless to say that you're pro-immigrant or anti-immigrant. The thing is, people are, I'm sure with the exception, there are, of course, a few people out there somewhere. I'm sure you can find some, perhaps if you know some big rocks that you can go turn over in your town and look under those rocks and find some people who are genuinely opposed to immigration, who are genuinely concerned about changing demographics, oh no, we're not a majority white nation anymore, that sort of thing. I'm sure you can find somebody somewhere who actually cares about that. But yeah.
Oh yeah, I know a few. I've known a few in political circles as well as locally.
A few. Yeah. Now, you say you know a few. Does that mean like 50%? You'd say of the conservatives?
Oh no. I would say that minority has become louder in recent years, and that's a valid criticism of Trump and his administration. Just that it has emboldened some of these more radical racial elements on the white side, but no, they're still few and far between.
So aside from those people, almost all of the people who are on what would be incorrectly called the anti-immigrant side of the debate are people who aren't concerned about immigration. They're concerned about people coming from other countries and living here. They're concerned about the law being followed. They're concerned about the border being open, the law concerning immigration being flouted, and about all the problems that arise from that. They're not concerned about demographic change. They're concerned about the law being followed. And so to cast those people as being anti-immigrant is quite ridiculous. But equally ridiculous is to cast people who are for illegal immigration, cast them as being pro-immigrant. Because illegal immigration doesn't help anybody. Illegal immigrants come to this country and they become trapped in what I think of as being like the ultimate welfare cliff. Welfare cliffs, of course, are the situation that many people who rely on our United States welfare system end up in, where you're reliant on benefits and you're not able to lift yourself up out of that state of poverty where you need the benefits because you're penalized for doing so. Depending on where you live and what situation you are in, if you are on welfare, there might be rules against you saving money. So if you actually save enough money that you might actually be able to afford something for yourself, then your welfare benefits get cut. And that's the welfare cliff.
Well, yeah, and I know there are at least a few states where welfare benefits actually amount to more than working a minimum wage job.
Yeah, and so people who come to the United States as illegal immigrants to get jobs here, they're sort of in a situation like that, where as illegals, there's work for illegals. You can get by being an illegal, but it's very difficult to make much of a life for yourself without having legal status. But at the same time, it's very difficult to become legal once you're here. Once you're here as an illegal immigrant, you are a criminal. You're subject to deportation and other penalties for being here illegally. It's very difficult to become legal once you're here. So illegal immigration really doesn't help anybody. And wanting to keep the borders open and establish sanctuary cities and all of these things that are supposedly pro-immigrant are really not helpful to immigrants at all, especially not immigrants who are wanting to come here legitimately and legally.
Well, let me push back a little bit on you on that and just, throw a burr under the saddle here, so to speak. So you say it doesn't help anybody, but if I am somebody who is, living in a town that's been ripped apart by, the drug cartels, and my family is running for its life, then I would imagine that getting across the border into the U.S., penalties or no penalties, job or no job, welfare or no welfare, is probably an improvement, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is all relative, of course. It might be an improvement for you, but how much better for you would it be if there were a way for you to come in legally? And keeping...
I feel like there is a way for people to come in legally.
There is, but it's really difficult. It's difficult. Now, I've got some friends who have immigrated to the United States legally. I have some friends who've come here from China, some friends who've come here from England, and they tell me they're amazed that we have an immigration system that is broken on both ends. And what they mean by that is if you want to become an American citizen legally and do it right, it's very hard. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. And many people who would want to become Americans just don't have the resources to do it because we make it so hard. But it's broken on the other side too, because if you just want to hop over the border and stay here illegally, that's easy. You can just do it. So it's like...
Well, right. And that incentivizes, like, those two are connected, right? Because if you make the legitimate system impossibly hard, you incentivize people to go around it. This is true in every area of law, right? If you have unrealistic expectations and you have unrealistic standards, and then you have a lack of enforcement, a lack of proper enforcement, all you result with, or all you get, the only result you get, I guess, is that people will ignore it. They ignore the laws and they go do whatever because the price of ignoring the law is actually not that high. And, despite all the rhetoric we've heard that was going to step up, that hasn't been the case. And you're absolutely right. Our immigration system is fundamentally broken. And what I see here, at least on the Republican side or on the conservative side, if you will, which, we should be careful not to equate those terms, but on the hardline right, at least on immigration, what I see is a generational gap. What I see is a lot of older Americans from the, strength of American manufacturing age and industry, who are looking at this as an economic threat and tend to view illegal immigration particularly through those lenses. Although, again, I do know a substantial minority of folks who have a problem with immigration in general, whether it's legal or illegal. But they view it mostly through economic lenses, either on the job and industry side or on the welfare side, or both. But that tends to be the main concern. What I then see is a younger generation who doesn't really view it in that context much at all. I think the numbers, the numbers and the historical context of the immigration debate now have changed, and I think a lot of us that are in the younger generation look at it more from the lines of, okay, I can understand why the welfare magnet is a problem and why we need to reform entitlements, but if you think that immigration is the main part of this problem, you're misdiagnosing it. The main part of the problem is entitlements, without which immigration would actually be a pretty minor issue. And I think that's mostly where I stand on it. I was a big fan of the immigration plan that was put forth by Ted Cruz when he ran for president in 2016. Basically, there were two sides to it, which I think address exactly what you're talking about, the both ends of the spectrum, where on one side you secure the border, you make sure that people who come in, and by the way, this was 2 years ago, so ISIS was still a thing, and there was still a threat from the Middle East, and there was, not to say that threat doesn't exist now, but it's been greatly reduced. I mean, you don't hear about it anymore. But the idea was you secure the border, make sure that only authorized folks are coming in. But on the flip side, you also streamline the immigration process. You up the number of immigrants that we do accept. You let people in who want to come here and who do have something to offer. You make that system easier so that people are incentivized to do things the right way. Now, I work in IT, and I work with a lot of folks who are trying to get their citizenship, U.S. citizenship, and a lot of them come from India and Pakistan, places like that. Now, these folks have been here for years, have paid taxes for years. These are highly skilled, highly educated people. And the things that they have to go through, the hoops that they have to go through are ridiculous. I mean, just ridiculous. These people have done everything by the book. And yet if they can't, if their paperwork gets held up for whatever reason, they have to go find a way out of the country, cross over to Mexico, and wait for the renewal to happen. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And this is after years of, buying homes and renting properties, buying cars, paying taxes, holding jobs. And these are decent people. And I think looking at that, I thought, wow, well, why is it that there's so much difference between what I know is going on with these folks and what I hear going on at the border with people, jumping the fence en masse and hopping on welfare, which is kind of the narrative that exists on the right about that. And then I looked into some of the numbers, and this is, where I look at immigration, when you're talking about the narrative that surrounds it, there's a lot of lies and there's a lot of misinformation. And I wish I could say that it was limited to one side of the aisle, but it's really not. I mean, there's a lot of bad information and just straight up misinformation.
Well, the whole narrative, like I said, the whole narrative really is a lie. The whole pro-immigrant versus anti-immigrant thing, it's a myth. And on the right side, it's framed as being, pro-American. They wouldn't say they're anti-immigrant; they would say they're pro-American. But that whole framing of it is ludicrous. Is that people who are claim to be pro-immigrant, where are they? Where are those people who say that they're pro-immigrant in helping your coworkers to gain the citizenship that it sounds like they really ought to have? You talk about people who have been living in the United States, living as Americans, contributing to society, and yet it's extremely difficult for them to be here legally or to become citizens. Where is the quote-unquote pro-immigration side standing up for those people? It's like it doesn't exist.
Well, right, and it's just the same as so many other things, Kavanaugh. It's about the narrative that you can pitch, and it's about how many cameras you can attract to your side, and how many headlines you can generate, and ultimately how much power you can leverage off of a given crisis. I mean, that's exactly what this comes down to, and that's what is irritating about the media that's coming out of the border right now, is that there's so much power to be gained by flexing or I guess by playing the moral superiority argument. You play that, there's so much power to be gained, and you're right, both sides do it. There isn't us versus them. And some of the things that I've found, just to sort of clear the air around illegal immigration. So I live in Iowa. We had a big flare up this year. Well, we have a flare up on immigration all the time because we have a congressman by the name of Steve King who says some pretty charged things about immigration. But we also had this year a couple of very tragic murders of young ladies in the state, one of whom was killed by an illegal immigrant. It was a college student named Molly Tibbetts who was killed. It turned out that her murderer was an illegal immigrant who was brought in and hired by a local company, faked his identity and all that stuff, and then ended up killing this girl. So it was a huge debate here. And immediately what happened, Trump himself got involved on Twitter. And there was this narrative on the right that, the immigrants coming from Mexico are, drug thugs who are up here raping and murdering everyone they come across. the statistics just don't bear that out. It is a myth, and I just wish that people on the right would stop saying it, because it's a myth. Legal and illegal immigrants, both, just the immigrant community as a whole, commits crimes at a lower rate than native-born Americans. It's just true. To say that that's not true, you have to artificially limit things. Like, for instance, one of the studies that's often referenced by conservatives says that, well, they commit federal crimes at a higher rate. Well, yeah, duh, because immigration crimes are federal crimes. Like, that's when you're talking about fraud and Social Security and immigration, that's federal, right? But 90% of crimes are not federal. So if you're talking about, assault and robbery and burglary and, vandalism, all of these things, these are state and local crimes, not federal crimes. So you really have to massage the data.
The sort of crimes that a normal person would actually have to be concerned about or afraid of are not federal crimes. They're local crimes.
Right. Exactly. So it's you really have to massage the data to get that. It lets you know, again, that narrative that you're talking about really does exist, the us versus them. The other part of it is the cost of illegal immigration is frequently overstated to the point of absurdity. And there is a great Cato study on why so many of those numbers are just downright false. The data that's excluded from them. I'll make sure that that's linked in the show notes. And then the fact that the other part, this was the part that really connected it in my mind between the professionals that I work with who are trying to get American citizenship and people who are down at the southern border trying to break into the fence. And that is this: most illegal immigration is not people hopping the fence. It's actually not. By far, the vast majority of illegal immigration is people overstaying their green cards. So again, doesn't that radically change the picture of what you think when you think of the immigration debate?
Yeah. But it's not picturesque. The idea of this tattooed, MS-13 member hopping over the fence at the dead of night, that's an emotionally charged image that gets people riled up and excited. Of course, the image of a person who's been here legally for years and whose green card expires and they just stay, there's no emotional punch to that. So it's not good. It's not a good picture. It's not good television.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does, this is a little bit of a tangent that I'm not going to get into fully now, but I will say the Democrats and the left is headed for a real problem with their intersectionality, because the immigration debate, as it extends to, people coming from Hispanic countries, is a very charged topic. But at some point, other immigrant communities are going to speak up and say, hey, what about us? So that's, a topic for another time, perhaps. But there is definitely, it's not a single race or a single nationality issue. The U.S. immigration system as a whole is just nonsense. It's completely broken. And that's when we get back to enforcement. Right? Like, can we even enforce this? Like, is there even a way to do this? And if we do, does it look like shooting tear gas at people who are trying to pick their way across the fence?
Well, going back for a second, something you just said is as far as the whole thing being broken. And you're absolutely right. The whole immigration system, as it stands now, is just complete nonsense. The fact that you can come across the border illegally and get any sort of benefits from the government is nonsense. That's crazy. The fact that you can be here and be a contributing citizen and then have to go wait in Mexico for your card to renew is nonsense. It's broken at both ends. And so construing this as an us versus them type of debate, where there's, the noble American side protecting us from the foreign hordes, or there's the noble, compassionate pro-immigrant side welcoming them in, like Lady Liberty says, neither one of those has any utility for fixing the actual problems that exist. You can be as pro-American, quote unquote, or as pro-immigrant, quote unquote, as you want to be all day, but it's not going to actually do anything practical to solve any of these problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to make an important distinction here. There are two different discussions going on. There is the broader immigration question, but in this latest case of the caravan at the southern border, to the best of my knowledge, these folks are actually showing up and claiming, or I guess requesting asylum and claiming refugee status, and doubtless, based on the stories that were being told, there are definitely legitimate refugee situations here where people are fleeing terrible, horrible things. And I have to say, if it was me and my family down in some of these countries and we saw people getting butchered and shot down in the streets and things like that, I would do anything to get my family
I would
out.
too, yeah.
So I understand the desperation, but what I don't, where I struggle is, if you're desperate and you're getting up to a border that is, another country, and you see a bunch of agents there to protect the borders of that country. I don't see the behavior that you see from this crowd so far, which has been aggressive and borderline violent. I mean, they're throwing rocks, they're throwing bottles, they're trying to break down the fence, pull apart the fence, and come in mass. And I can't imagine that. Like, and I think what I was mentioning to you earlier, the simile that I use is, if you show up at my door and you are homeless or abused and you need help, I will open up my home to you. I will, roll out the red carpet. I will take care of you. I will, do everything in my power to help you. But if you show up at my door with a battering ram and you break it down and you come inside and kick your muddy boots up on my sofa and start snacking out of my fridge, we're going to have a different discussion. I mean, that's a different conversation. And to me, that's the problem that's going on at the southern border right now is you have one narrative being peddled by one side that says, look at all these poor, pitiful people. And I think that's mostly true. But then you've got the reality of it, which is there's a sense of entitlement that says, no, we are allowed in your country. We don't care what your laws are, and we're going to break in whether you like it or not. And they're so counterproductive.
Well, the thing is, I mean, and you say, like you said, I'm sure that some of the people in this caravan are legitimate in the sense that they are actually fleeing terrible conditions in their homes. But there are a lot of other people in there who are economic migrants who just want to come in for jobs and stuff and aren't actually fleeing anything. They're coming toward the jobs and the welfare or whatever. The thing is, how do you differentiate between those people? The group is mixed. And
Magic 8 Ball.
Well, the thing is, that's why I say that the people who want to set up sanctuary cities and the people who want to have open borders are not really pro-immigrant. Because if you're really pro-immigrant and you really want to help people who legitimately should be allowed to come in, for whatever reason, however you define should, the refugees or, because they're coming here for jobs that they've legitimately applied for or whatever. But if you want people who are legitimate to be able to get across, you have to have an orderly process that is followed and enforced consistently. You have to have laws. I mean, that's why we have laws at all, is so that we're not acting randomly. We're not acting arbitrarily, that there is a consistent process that everybody knows that is followed consistently so we can have fairness and people can understand what's going on and what they need to do. And if you have that, then you can avoid situations like we have now, when, just for simplicity's sake, I'll say good people and bad people mixed together. That's I even like saying good and bad. We'll say people who are legitimately should be able to come in and people who are fortune seekers. And you have them mixed together, and how do you differentiate them? Well, if you have this open border situation where people know they can just come in or think they can just come in, of course they're going to try and exploit that and all mixed together. And the only way to avoid that is to have a consistent process.
Okay, so to play devil's advocate, then, if you based on the current numbers that we have, if immigrants commit violent crimes anyway, at a lower rate than native-born Americans, why wouldn't you just let everybody in?
Well, as a matter of principle, you can't let everybody in just because you have to have a process. Letting everybody in is not a process. That's not an application of law. And maybe your laws are really lax and lenient. Maybe your law says that you let pretty much everybody in. And in some cases, that could be reasonable. That could be a good law in some circumstances. But nonetheless, it needs to be a law. And whatever the law is, it needs to be followed and enforced. And unfortunately, that's not what we've had here in the southern border for goodness, the last 40 years. I'm not even sure how long. But people have felt free and have gotten away with flouting the law and coming here illegally for such a long time that everybody now assumes you can just do it. And that assumption is leading people to exploit our asylum system, which makes it very difficult for people who legitimately need asylum, who will legitimately qualify for it. How do they get in and how do they apply with being mixed in with all the fake asylum seekers who are trying to exploit the system?
Mm-hmm. Right. And ultimately, how do they get the help they need? And that's a discussion that has actually bled over from the political into the religious, where there's members of the church now and churches and charities looking for ways to help. And it's difficult to say how to do that. I mean, somebody was talking to me the other night about, as Christians, as the church, how do we get involved, knowing that there are people down there who are legitimately suffering that we really have to find a way to take care of. How do we disentangle the government conflict that's going on down there so that we can reach these people? And this is the same discussion that also came up during the Syrian refugee crisis a couple years ago, where there was all these people fleeing war in Syria, and the images that came out of there were shocking and horrifying. I mean, you had children drowning and being blown apart and loaded into ambulance with body parts missing. I mean, it's really, really horrific, terrible stuff. And when you look at that and you think, well, yeah, I've got a comfortable American life and an American home, and I could help. I could bring people in. I could help these people. I could give money. I could give time. I could open up my home. But how do how have we gotten to the point where the church can't even do these things because it's so tangled up in government that's not even like you look at it and you think, well, it's not even our job anymore. And a lot of people perceive that it's the government's job to take care of people and poor people and disadvantaged people. So there's no role even there for the church anymore.
Well, like you said, it's like we look to a government solution. It's like we think if there are poor conditions, let's just say in Syria, we don't even stop to consider what could be done about that aside from some sort of change in federal government policy, specifically a policy that would bring refugees here to the United States. And we fall into this trap, I think, of considering that to be the only option. It's like we either do nothing and just allow whatever conditions are there to persist, or we evacuate them to the United States. And there's this dichotomy, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think usually the biggest thing is to, in any situation where there is poverty or suffering, well, let's say you have someone comes into the doctor and says, "Oh, doctor, my foot hurts." What kind of a doctor simply says, "Oh, well, here, take some painkillers, go home"? It's like, that's a terrible doctor. What the doctor does is try and diagnose the cause of that and fix the cause so that the source of the pain stops. And we don't really even look for that. It's like we hear about people suffering in Syria or people suffering in Honduras or wherever, and we don't even stop to ask why. We just go to this knee-jerk reaction of, oh, we need the government to have a solution, which probably means either one, throwing gobs of money at the area indiscriminately, we'll just fly over in a plane and we'll drop money on the situation as if we were firefighters dropping stuff on a wildfire, or we will bring them here to America and they can get government housing. And neither of those solutions really considers what the root causes might be. We need to understand, look locally, and try and think of logical reasons why these things are happening, logical solutions for them. I think the problem is that we even have an idea of default solutions. It's like people are unique and people's situations are always unique and the histories of these places are always unique, and every place where there is suffering or poverty is going to have to some extent a unique solution. And even having this idea of default solutions, like, oh, we need to give them a bunch of money or we need to bring them to America or some other default, is wrongheaded. If you want to help somebody, you need to understand why they are suffering the way they are. And I don't think we even really try to do that.
Well, sure. And I think that there's this place where, if you're an American Christian, you look at it and go, we want to work for long-term change. We want to see policies change that will help people and kind of get to the root of the problem like you're talking about. But in the meantime, when people are suffering, there's got to be something that we can do. And, when I look at world history, the church has so often been the catalyst for change, political change, that I can't help but feel like there is a way that we can do that we can be that again. And maybe this is an opportunity to do that. Maybe it's not. But I look at another time in our history during World War II, when there were boatloads of Jews coming to the United States seeking asylum, and to our eternal shame, we turned them away. And I sometimes think, what if the church had been there? What if the church had spoken up then? How different could that have been? And when you look at the impact that the Church United has had in places like Poland, where that was the beginning of the Soviet bloc coming apart, started with the Polish church. And when you see that. That faith element rising up and doing something about it, I clearly understand why people in Christianity and in the church are looking at this as an opportunity to do something great. And maybe it's not all about the border crisis itself. Maybe it's about proving that Christians can come together and do something good, and get over some of these philosophical and political differences in order to do what's clearly commanded, which is take care of the least of these. And you see that, we just got over Thanksgiving. You see that same sort of spirit on the local level when you see food pantries sort of overflowing at this time of year and people going out to serve in one capacity or another. But expanding that to a national level, maybe this is the opportunity to do that. Maybe it isn't. but it's definitely sorely needed. I mean, there's got to be somewhere that the church can come together and do this. The problem is with so many of our duties and so many of our opportunities to help the poor, we've just been replaced by the government. And you can date that all the way back to the New Deal or even earlier, but there's a lot of things that the church was supposed to be leading society on, and at some point government became Christianized to the point that they decided they would do it instead. And of course it never works, and the welfare system and Medicare and Medicaid, all of these things have been broken for a long time. But we keep trying it, and I have to wonder where that cycle ends. Is it by the church stepping up and saying, no, we're going to take the lead on this, or is it by getting rid of these inefficient and wasteful programs so that the church can take over? I don't know. Where does that cycle end?
Well, if you're asking my opinion, it's to a large extent the fact that you have to participate in the government programs makes it really difficult for the church to step up. If the government has claimed authority over some area, like you read these headlines about people getting in trouble, being fined or even arrested for trying to feed homeless people in certain cities.
Isn't that disgusting?
Yeah, but it's disgusting, but it's logical. It's logical because if the government has claimed some area of authority and said this is what the government does now, this is the government's job, governments can't have competition. That's kind of what government is. You can't compete with the government because the government participation is compulsory. Once you're a customer of the government, you can't quit. So as far as the church stepping up, that's really difficult. It's really difficult for the church to step up into areas where the government has claimed authority. I'm not sure what you do, Joel. I'm not sure how the church can step up and be charitable or whatever in an area where the government has claimed that territory and said this is ours.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, because I can tell you there's a financial crisis headed our way like a hurricane,
Yeah.
and that's going to have a major impact upon our charity and our wealth redistribution schemes and all of our welfare social safety net. So who knows? Maybe that'll be the impetus to give it a change. But hey, we are gonna call this a wrap tonight. We're going to be putting out some questions this week on social media about the immigrant crisis, about the border crisis, and let us know what you think. Again, you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/TheCI Show and Twitter at TheCI Show. Give us a follow, join the conversation. We will talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in.